Okay, the topic for today, Pirkei Avot, Chapter 2, Mishnah 3. This is a continuation of the statements attributed to Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Now, last week I talked about part 1, where he was talking about the study of Torah, together with the livelihood, and also about working with the community. And I said that it was 3 parts of a relationship of a person in this world: the relationship to Torah study, the relationship to their work, and the relationship to the community of giving to the community too, which I call the reinterpretation of what was said by Shimon HaTzadik in the first chapter of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. It's like a refocusing or reinterpreting the meaning of that idea. Now, also, what you have here in this second Mishnah, we're going to have the same thing. He's going to reinterpret what was said in chapter 1, Mishnah 10 by Shmaya and Avtalion, which is also interesting. And in general, what's going to happen, his 3 statements in Mishnah 1, 2, and 3 are talking about 3 relationships. As I said, Mishnah 2 is talking about the relationship on the individual level, to the study of Torah, to your work, and to the community. The second one is going to talk about the relationship to authority. And the third one is going to talk about relationship to God. To God you submit, to authority, try to get out of it. But now this is interesting because remember, he is the president of the Sanhedrin, which of course in his day means the last Jewish authority in Judea over the Jews, in Palestine over the Jews. So it's interesting how he sees these things. So without further ado, let's look what he says. Hevu zihirin barashut. Be very careful when it comes to the authorities. Here the authorities in this case means, of course, the Roman government. But he seems to say in general, be careful about getting too close to political authority. Because they smile at you and they give you presents in order for you to get closer to them. But it's all for self-interest. They pretend that they are your friends and they like you when things are going well. But as soon as you falter, as soon as you fall, they are gone. Now that's that expression that for success, there are many parents, but failure is an orphan. So when you're doing well, they're all your friends and they all want to be there. And when you fall, they are all gone. Now, actually, if we, as I said, this is a reinterpretation of the statement of Shmaya and Avtalion. What does Shmaya say? And you'll see that it's actually, the statement is less severe than what Shmaya said. Shmaya said, love work, ehavat hamlacha, snata rabbanut, hate being authoritative, hate positions of power, the altit vadar rashut, and don't have any connection with the authorities. Keep away from them like a pestilence. So, now this is quite an extreme expression of Shmaya, whereas Rabban Gamliel is not taking it that far. He's saying be cautious about authority. He's not saying altit vada, have no connection. Be careful with authority, because you have to deal with them, especially in his case. He is a representative of the Jewish people. You have to deal with authority. You can't pretend they don't exist, but don't have any great expectations. See things in the way they are. Because again, these are self-interest frameworks. They are not there to help you necessarily. Now, this sounds very, I guess you would say it's critical or But on the other hand, it's quite realistic, especially if we're talking about in antiquity. Authorities are people who grab power, basically, and they take it over and they fight with each other, and it's kol dalim gavar, it's Darwinian survival of the fittest. So basically, that's, I guess, what politics always was. Even in modernity, in a democratic framework, within that democratic framework, the politicians also battle each other for survival and make alliances against each other, so that there's a constant war going on of alliances and backstabbing and et tu brute within even democratic parliamentary systems. Um, Vis-a-vis the people, people get, of course, more power in the sense that they have the ability to pick and choose. But after they picked and choose, between these authoritative members, you basically have a lot of politicking, what we call it. But we try to differentiate between diplomats and politicians, if you want to put it in those terms. But um, but you have to deal with them. You have to deal with them, but you have to realize that, okay, I'll put it in modern terms. When you vote for a government, you are not voting for an ideal, you're voting for the lesser of evils. Because ideals are nice, but human beings are built on self interest. And therefore, what you have to do is you have to pick the lesser of evils. Somebody once put it, take the ones who are going to interfere in your life the least and leave you to live your life without too much hurt. And so that's what you try to strive to. It's not saying that every now and then there isn't an idealist within the system, but the system will try to crunch them because nobody likes people who are too idealistic, unless, of course, they don't hurt anybody and don't seek any power and try not to control. It's sort of the what I call the vicious relationship between human interest and what humans know to be good. So, or else we'd be in a perfect world. Mashiach would be here already, right? So it's just a realism that um, we have to live with. And Rabban Gamliel was a realist. He was living under Roman occupation. He wasn't as extreme as his predecessor Shmaya, who was also living under Roman occupation, but Shmaya was actually living before the temple was destroyed. Rabban Gamliel is living after the temple is destroyed. And even though he's saying, look, you got to work with authorities. You have no choice, but don't idolize them. They're not anything more than what you first thought about them. Because people are people, and people are there for self-interest. If you are a multimillionaire, they will be your best friends, and as soon as you lose it, they will be gone. And don't let that surprise you. So if you see life in those terms, those things won't surprise you. It's just, a realism about human society. If you're looking for love, find it among your family members. You don't have to find it among politicians. There is love in the world. There are good people in the world. They don't have to be in the parliament. So I would say most of the time to keep away. Again, I'm not saying this in the sense that it's impossible to have a good person by mistake make their way into a place of power. It is possible. I mean, one of the points of democracy in general was in order to create enough people out there that everybody's eyeing the other person. So it creates a sort of balance of power. Because if you have 120 or 200 people sitting in a parliament and everybody has their personal interest, but they keep looking at the other guy what their personal interest is in order to try to veto them. So they're all vetoing each other, so they're sort of keeping themselves all in check as a sort of vicious cycle. It's when they band up together that it gets a little bit nerve-wracking. As Winston Churchill once said, that democracy is probably the worst form of government, except for all the others. So it's it's a system which is out there to try to protect the minimal rights of the citizens. And even though the system works very slowly, of course, because obviously if you had a benevolent dictator, which sometimes happens in history, when you had nice kings and queens, yes, they could push things through faster, but the chances of them making very bad mistakes and you paying for it is also greater. So it's better to have that democratic system with all its faults and just make sure that it remains democratic. So getting back to Rabban Gamliel, again, this is part two. If part one was talking about the individual, part two is now talking about the relationship to authority. Part three, which will be next week, is a relationship to God. And it'll be interesting to see how he looks differently at the relationship to God and relationship to authority. Unfortunately, you have some people with a religious attitude, they see God as authority. I've seen this sometimes. People want to become religious because they want authority in their lives. They want there to be frameworks in their lives. They don't like the things that are all over the place. Tell me what to do. Tell me where I should be doing in this world. And they want God to be the authority. People like that, though, they become very susceptible in their naivete that man becomes the authority, because then you have human beings talking in the name of God, telling them what to do, because they were looking for authority. And God is not looking for authority, but human beings are. So you'll see the vast difference then in Rabban Gamliel's statements between God and authority, and maybe I'll mention it right now. When it comes to authority, be very careful. Authority is not there to help you. It's going to bring you close when for their own purposes. They will love you when you're doing well, and they will leave you when you fall. Okay? This is a strong narrative, very realistic, but in a sense, it's also not as strong as what Shmaya said in chapter 1. And then I'll just go to the first part of next week, because it's the first part of next week, which is the exact continuation of Rabban Gamliel's statement, part 3. He used to say, Rabban Gamliel, Aseh retzoncha kirtzonach, which means make your will like the divine will. Kedei she'aseh retzoncha kirtzono, so that the divine will, meaning God, will make his will like your will. Annul your will before his will, in order that he shall annul his will, in order that he shall annul the will of others before you. This I'll go more to next week, but I want to explain what's going on here. When it comes to authority, you have to be careful about authority. God is not about authority. God is telling you to do things for your benefit. God has no interest in the mitzvot. The Midrash says, do you think God cares if we slaughter the animal from the back of the neck or the front of the neck? God doesn't eat animals. But the mitzvot were given, litzaref behemet abriot. The mitzvot were there to purify your heart, to make you a better person. That's why the mitzvot are there. God doesn't need the mitzvot. God gives the mitzvot for you. It's not about authority. That's why in the Zohar, the mitzvot are called itin, which means advice. And that's why those first two trees, the first command in all of history, which was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is called the tree, eitz, like the Hebrew word eitzah, which means advice. So the Zohar calls the mitzvot aitin, which are advice, and the Torah calls the first mitzvah a tree, from the root word advice. It's advice because we don't have to follow the commandments. But if we do, we will receive the greatest reward, which is being able to actualize your potential as a human being. That is the greatest reward. People in authoritative mentalities, they're worried about, what's the reward in the world to come? Because they can't leave their bubble of the authoritative mentality. So this is Rabban Gamliel. This is very insightful understanding of the human situation. You work as an individual in your study of Torah, in your work, in your giving to others. That was the first part. The second part, authority, they're not there for your benefit. You need them because if you don't have police, there'll be robbers out there. But don't imagine for a moment that they're out there for your benefit. So be very careful with them. They might like you when you're successful and leave you when you're not. God is not about authority. God is there for your benefit because He created you and He gives you advice and He cares about you. Authoritative personalities don't care about you, they care about them. God is not about authority. But God will tell you what to do in order for you to get to the right spot in your life, to the right place where you want to go. And therefore, which means we all have our desires and wills, and God does too. In this case, it's worth following God's will because God cares about us. Like a parent and a child. The parent will say to the child, do this. The child says, that's not what I want to do now. I want to go out and play. The parent says, I know you want to go out and play, but the truth is, I have good intentions. And I have good ideas about your future. When I say I want you to sit down and study this, there is a reason for it. Not because I'm trying to be bad to you. So when God gives us the mitzvot, it's for our benefit. That's called aseh ritzoncha kirtzono. Try to see if you can shape your will according to the will of God. And then, kadesh aseh ritzoncha, aseh ritzono kirtzoncha, make His will like yours, kadesh aseh ritzoncha kirtzono, because then God will do the same. When you really need something, He will do it. Because when you really need something, it will be something that you really need. Then God will do it. There's the Dalai Lama, I think he was quoted saying one time, isn't it a good thing that God doesn't answer all our prayers? Because sometimes we ask for the wrong things. So, but what Rabban Gamliel says is very deep here. It's like, let the will of God be your will if you understand that what God wants is really okay for you. It's good for you. And then he says, Kadei, in order that your will be His. So people understand your will be His. Okay, it's a trade-off, which means I'll kick God's mitzvot. I did my part. Now you do your part. I need $1 million house on a beach in California. Let me have it. No, that's not what it means. But that's the way people understand it. What it means is make your will like God's when you realize that what He wants for you is good for you. And then the things that you start asking for as you develop your personality in the right direction will all be the correct things. So God will say, you know what? Yeah. Yeah. But you know, that house in California at the beach might not be good for you. I'm not saying it's not beautiful. It's actually good for certain people. Maybe for you at this point in your life, it's not exactly what you need. You know, my father used to tell the story about two children. One of them said that God always listens to his prayers. The other one was a little mischievous system. Okay, I want you to ask God for a lollipop, huh? I said, okay. So he moves aside, prays, ask God for a lollipop. Comes back 5 minutes later. Friend says, okay, so did you ask God for a lollipop? He says, yes, I did, just like I said I would. Okay, where's the lollipop? Says, God said I cannot have one. So, you see, we have to learn, even in our prayers, to ask for things that are good for us. That's called because when we start following God's will, then the things we start asking for become the right things for us when there's a chance to actually get it. He continues this, by the way, and says, sometimes you have to give in from your desire before God's desire. That's already different. Meaning you're asking for something which seems to be the right thing, but for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be the will of God. Because sometimes the will of God will override even when you ask for the right thing. It's interesting how he explains it here. Here he says, okay, that's according to the Tosafot Yontif. Sometimes there are things we want to do, but we can't do. But they seem to be the right thing to do, but halacha doesn't allow it. And because sometimes there are collective things that need to be done, and sometimes particular, without getting into more details. The fact that we actually want to do something and we think it's the right thing, but because it wasn't God's will, when we do that, then He will also, if there are others who are trying to stop your will unjustifiably, He will help you. There's more to say about this, and it's the middle of the Mishnah Daled. I will go back to it next week. So these were the three parts of Rabban Gamliel's statement. Statement number one, relating to man as an individual, study of Torah, work, and doing for others. Part two, relationship to authority, and part three, the relationship to God, which is different than the relationship to authority. Shalom, shalom.